I've been using PS5 for quite some time, and I have some things I want to say. Especially after the smaller, slimmer version got released, let me share my personal experience with you, and once and for all, answer the question whether you should buy the PS5 now or wait. This is my PlayStation 5. I think right now we can pretty much call it fat. And not only because of a newer, slimmer model, just look how big it is. The size of PS5 is still as shocking for me now as it was a couple of years ago when the console got released. It still doesn't fit under most TVs and in the majority of interior designs, but I quite like it. This design makes it impossible to ignore the existence of this console and solidifies its presence in your room. It may come as a surprise for you, but PS5 Fat has 3 revisions that all look the same. But there are a couple of important differences between them that you should know about before buying. Or just a bit, I'll be quick, I promise. As I said, there are 3 revisions of the PS5 Fat. CFI 1000 is the initial release of the PS5 from 2020, and it was quite hot and sometimes loud, but generally it was a successful launch. Of course, there was always room for improvement, and CFI 1100 did just that. Sony released it in July 2021, and it did a few minor changes. At the core of this revision was a redesigned heatsink, which effectively improved cooling efficiency, making sure the PS5 will maintain optimal temperatures during any gaming session. This redesigned heatsink allowed for a slight weight reduction. It didn't really matter to the consumer, but probably saved Sony a couple bucks in copper and delivery costs. However, according to Austin Evans, this revision got a bit power hungry. It's not something you would notice, but still. And then came the CFI 1200. The motherboard got smaller, the cooling system got refined, it became even lighter than before. The power consumption was also better optimized, making the PS5 a bit more energy efficient. It was a small but meaningful refinement, but most importantly, it got a shrink from 7 nanometers to 6. No one mentioned this in promo materials, but it totally happened, and this is exactly what I have, the CFI 1200. Let me admit one thing, I am not a hardcore gamer, I don't spend 10 hours every day playing games. My experience, I think, will be the most accurate to the one you will have if you buy this console. And this deserves a like, what do you say? Make me happy, click that button, and now how was my experience with the PS5? Well, it's been really nice most of the time, but it did manage to confuse me after all. For example, orientation. This design of the PS5 suggests that it should stand vertically. However, there are reports online from people who had their PS5 leak liquid metal because of the vertical standing.
This is scary.
Yeah, Manuel, it is. So from this perspective, it makes much more sense to have your PS5 horizontally on its side, but I personally don't really like the look of that. For me, it's kinda a never-ending struggle to choose one orientation, so I just flip the PlayStation when I feel like doing it, and hopefully this will prevent mine from leaking liquid metal. Well, luckily, no matter how I put my PS5, the Wi-Fi signal remains strong, and this is because I use the Ray router, the sponsor of today's video. Having a stable Wi-Fi for me is a must, and this Ray E4 AX3000 router has been making sure I always have a reliable connection. This router delivers up to 2400 megabits per second on the 5 GHz band and 574 megabits per second on the 2.4 GHz band, making it perfect for even the most demanding users like me. With 5 omnidirectional antennas and 5 high-power FEMs, this router provides a strong Wi-Fi signal that can penetrate through my home no matter how many walls or rooms I have. I have 1 gigabit at home and was able to reliably hit 800 megabits per second even from a separate room. My old router with similar specs was doing only around 500 megabits per second. I was also impressed with the ability to divide the traffic on different channels. I can create one IoT for smart home devices with lower speed and a separate one only for gaming. This way the traffic gets prioritized correctly without messing the signals up. I also appreciate the router's multi-gig Ethernet ports. These ports can be aggregated to establish an ultra-fast internet connection of up to 1.6 gigabits per second for maximum performance. Ray E4 has a one-click Ray mesh button, which makes it easy to set up a mesh network with other Ray routers. The Ray E4 next-gen Wi-Fi 6 router works with all internet service providers. I was able to set it up with my existing ISP without any problems. In addition to all of the features I've already mentioned, the Ray E4 router also includes a dual-core CPU, multi-level game acceleration, dual WAN, WAN aggregation, OpenVPN, and 5 built-in FEMs. This router is fast, reliable, and easy to use. I will leave a link in the description for you. Use this coupon code for 20% discount. Another thing that I've come to accept is the OS. On the one hand, it's really nice. It's fast, responsive, and intuitive, but it also lacks some important features that the PS4 has. For example, on PS5, there is no way to organize my games into folders like I could on PS4. This might not sound like much, but if you own a lot of games, this feature may come in handy. I also miss the ability to set custom wallpapers. On PS4, there was such an option, and it allowed me to make the console a bit more personal. And I don't even want to mention PS3 themes that completely revamped the interface. There are no such things on PS5. Everything is standardized, similar for everyone, but it's not an empty interface. For example, when I highlight a game, the art of that particular game takes over the entire home screen with a quiet background music. I think it's a cool little thing that gets you immersed in the game before you even launch it. Overall, I do like this improved interface and how fast it is, but again, it would be nice to have those features back. Also, if you're coming to PS5 from PS4, you will have to update your muscle memory, because pressing the PlayStation button now brings up Control Center that allows switching between apps, viewing friends, checking notifications, and so on. This Control Center is customizable, of course. What I do miss in PS5 is the ability to properly multitask between games, like it's done on Xbox. I do not own Xbox myself, but a couple of my friends do. Still, the PS5 is better, Manuel, in my opinion. Anyway, the quick resume feature on Xbox is something the PS5 should have had from the start, but now it doesn't. I can't just minimize one game and open another one to seamlessly switch between them when I want. The PS5 will close the first game if I decide to open another one. Most of the time I play only one game at a time. Having that ability to switch between games would have definitely changed my experience. Changing the experience is something that Sony managed to do after all, and the reason for it is the DualSense controller with its adaptive triggers and surreal vibrations. I mean, the haptic feedback is just insane. You can feel everything from the subtle vibrations of raindrops to the intense explosions, and the adaptive triggers are just as impressive. They can change resistance based on what's happening in the game. For example, when I'm trying to pull a heavy object in the game, the triggers just like I'm actually straining to lift it. It feels really realistic, like a new dimension of gaming. Just like the PS4 controller, the DualSense has a built-in speaker that plays sounds and helps immerse you even more. I just wish the developers were a bit more creative with implementing all the immersive features this controller has to offer, because in most games, it's wildly underutilized. The adaptive triggers work in most shooter games, but as for all those vibrations and sensors, it still feels like a gimmick that only talented developers would use. Astro's Playroom was launched with the PS5, and it is still the only game that properly utilizes everything the PS5 controller can do. Aside from that, the controller is great. Its shape and weight are spot on for my hands, and I find it more comfortable than the PS4 controller. The grip, the materials, the buttons, everything is top-notch. When it comes to running games, it's just something. PS5, in my opinion, is the best platform for next-gen gaming. Oh, sorry, current-gen gaming. All games run impeccably well, with a perfect frame rate and great graphics, even at 4K res. What still amazes me to this day are loading times. PS5 is so fast that the game launches earlier than I can put a controller aside and reach for my phone. With older consoles, I had enough time to watch a few TikToks before being led into a game. Here, everything is almost instantaneous. You wouldn't expect less from a gaming console, right? As I said, I am not a hardcore gamer, so for me, PS5 is a perfect way to relax in the evening. With PS4 and those long loading times, I often chose just to watch videos simply because I didn't want to wait for a couple of minutes for the game to launch, and then for a couple more minutes for the latest save data to load. With PS5, it's a fluent and fast process. Even if I have just half an hour to play, I will do it simply because loading is so fast. And the games themselves, the PS5 is a beast, capable of running all games. And as you know by now, GTA 6 is coming in 2025, and it's not coming to PC, only consoles. So right now might be the best moment for you to buy your own PS5. I will leave a couple of links to the best best deals in the description. But which version of the PS5 should you choose? Should you go for a used PS5 fad, or should you pay a little extra and buy a slimmer, smaller version? I think both options are quite viable. However, there are a few things you should remember. One, if you're going to buy a used PS5 fad, I recommend looking for a CFI 1200. It will have far less issues in the future, better thermals, and improved energy efficiency. I also recommend buying a bundle with 2 controllers, just like I did. 2 controllers is always better than 1, right? Yeah, I've got a stand for these controllers too, not a big deal. If you want to buy your PS5 from this newest revision, the slimmest one, I recommend you wait a little. If your calendar allows you to wait for half a year or maybe a year, I would do that. You don't want to test how well Sony did their job with your wallet. It's always better to wait a little before buying, but if you're fearless, just go for it. The newest PS5 is much smaller, which is super nice. It has a detachable disk drive, so if you buy a digital version and later decide to make it a normal one, you can just buy a disk drive separately and attach it. So good stuff, just really good stuff. What's interesting is that there is a slim chance that the best gaming console for you is already in your possession. And yes, I'm talking about that MacBook of yours. It really can launch AAA games and play them comfortably. Maybe not as good as the PS5, but at least it doesn't cost extra money. In this case, you absolutely should watch our video about gaming on Mac. Click here to watch, and I will see you there.